wavering wave or perhaps a lit fuse, in that explosion lies the continual birth of our visual awareness, which once again blows us apart, such that at one and the same time we can remain where we stand, in place as our bodies are, and roam heaven and earth as our attention wanders the furthest reaches of the visual field. Vision, as Merleau-Ponty puts it, is the means given me for being absent from myself. So light is the outcome of a kind of fission-fusion reaction that unites us with the cosmos at the very moment that it divides us from ourselves. And as such, it doesn't behave at all in the way we are accustomed from textbooks on optics. It's not emitted from a source, nor does it enter the eye. And in the textbook, the typical diagram you'll get in optics is something like this. Here is a candle. Here is an eye. So there's the source, there's the recipient, and light travels in a straight line. It's emitted from the source and it's received by the eye. That's the way it is normally drawn in optics. But in Merleau-Ponty's depiction of it, it's not like that at all. It doesn't travel in a straight line that connects this point source to a receptor. Rather, like a spark, it bursts forth from the fusion of the two poles of vision, affective and cosmic, in directions orthogonal to the line of their connection. So imagine here that you have the cosmic and the affective, and they're beginning to, these poles are beginning to collide. Off comes the light, like a shower of fireworks, in the direction orthogonal at right angles to the line reaching those two. So it's quite different from a straight line going from the source to the connector. It's just shooting off like sparks. What do we would think of light as the sparks of fireworks, not as the line going from that particular bit of light to the eye. That, at least, is what Merleau-Ponty is trying to say, I think. Well, if that's so for light, then how would it be for sound? And I think the same argument would, in principle, work just as well. There are indeed corporeal and celestial poles of hearing, the one sensing, that's a corporeal one, the other sensible, that's a celestial one, which when they collide, generate the experience of sound. And that very sound, born of the fusion of the affective and the cosmic, where what is heard turns out to be our own hearing, also divides us, so that much as in a dream, we are simultaneously at home in our bodies and at large in the cosmos. You go and listen to anything, you'll find, I just sort of heard a car parking, passing by over there. I was over there and here at the same time. So sound in that sense does not travel from source to recipient, as say from a loudspeaker to the ear. It rather swirls between the two, as a river between its banks, wrapping itself around obstructions and forming eddies in the process. So something like this. If you have obstruction, it's going like this. I actually got this idea from looking at a famous painting by Van Gogh called Starry Night. I don't know if you know it, but it's got the stars, and the stars are here. And then it's painted the light, and the light is going like this. In between. In an earlier painting, he tried painting stars like that, what we usually do. Here's a star, and here's the light coming off. And then you go from there to there. And that's exactly the difference that I'm getting at. That one could apply that same distinction, I think, to sound as well. So it wraps itself around things in eddies, and every eddy is then a centre of auditory awareness. Sound flows, as Campbell wrote. It flows from the out there towards me and through me. And if I were an eddy in a stream, I would say just the same thing of running water. I am an eddy. Water runs from out there towards me and through me. In short, sound, just like light, is the outcome of a fission-fusion reaction. And it's worth emphasising once again how this result differs from the view that has come down to us from classical acoustics, according to which the ear, as a recipient of sound rather than party to its production, translates physical impulses from the environment across the boundaries of the organism, from outside to inside, where they reappear as sensory stimuli. Here, the interior subject, at one with itself, is divided against the cosmos. But in the fission-fusion model, to the contrary, the perceiver is one with the cosmos, but divided from him or herself. So neither light nor sound is physical, nor is it psychic. It is what I will call atmospheric. And by the term atmosphere, I refer to the conflation of the affective and the cosmic, to which I've already referred. Actually, in English, I don't know how this works in German, but in English this conflation is well expressed in the word temper, from the Latin temperare, to mix, and in all its derivatives, temperate, tempest, temperament, temperature, that refer at once to affective moods and motivations, and to those fluxes of the medium that we commonly call weather. Light is atmospheric, and sound is atmospheric, in this sense. Light is atmospheric because it simultaneously beams and beckons. It beams because it is an animation of the soul. It beckons because it illuminates the way from afar. I've been trying to find corresponding words for sound. It's a fun thing to do. You do it in different languages. I do it in English. We speak in English of peals. So like this. Peals of bells, of thunder, of laughter, which summon, warn, or attract. And there's a direct etymological link between peal and the verb appeal, which means to issue a call of some kind. So we could say that just as light beckons, sound peals. The distant peal of the bell is the counterpart of the fire of the beacon. But what then is the equivalent for the beam of light? Well, up until about half an hour ago, I was still scratching my head, and I was going to say that I can't think what it is, so we'll just have to talk about sound beams. But I suddenly realized that the word I need might be pitch. Because to pitch is to throw, to push out. Because remember that the peel is something that's calling you in, it's beckoning. The beam is like a face, somebody's beaming at you, it's pitching out. So to pitch is to throw, to cast into the world. And it's a word that has a very important place in acoustic theory, which we'll come to. So, pitch too is an animation of beam. So we could say that if light beams and beckons, so sound pitches and pearls. Pitches and peals, sorry. Which brings me at length to the cello. Because, in a nutshell, the cello is an instrument for pitching sound. And to play is to pull a pitch from the instrument as sound is pulled from silence. I don't know, it's not the same for every kind of instrument, but I'm not going to risk any kind of performance. But have to see what's going on. But when you And then absolute silence. And then I could pull that note out. When you play a stringed instrument, the sound is literally wrenched out of silence. There's silence, so the sound is still in there. So if you pull it out. And of course it's different if you're playing a wind instrument. And I can't play a wind instrument, so I can't speak for wind players. They'll have to interpret things their own way. But certainly for the cello, you pull the sound out. And all sound, I'm going to argue, comes from silence. So silence is not the absence of sound, rather it is sound at its most concentrated, at its most dense. I'm going to return to this point at the end, but just note in passing that the connection between silence and blackness and pitch, which of course is tar, and pitch black is the pitch black night, from which I'm going to argue all sound and all colour comes. But I'll come to that point at the end. First I want to give a bit more attention to the cello itself. We call it an instrument, but what exactly does it do? Stone in its case, of course, it does nothing at all. Sitting on the floor there, it's just nothing, just sitting there. It is just an object. We recognise it as a cello because there are lots of other objects that are just like it. It's a bit like a species of animal. You can recognise this or that species of beetle or bird. And, well, we all recognise a cello when we see one. And if you go to an orchestra and there are 10 cellos all playing in rows, you can see the cello 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can count them and classify them. And you can even then start doing more complex classifications. And you've got the cello species, and you've got the viola species, and the violin species, and that makes up the strings genus. And you all this kind of, you can do this kind of biological classification, which is a classification of inert objects that are simply what they are in themselves. So it is just an object, and in my estimation, it is a most beautiful and superbly crafted object. And we can look at it and admire it in its case, or in a museum behind glass. But beyond that, not much can be ascertained simply by looking at it. The instrument sitting there is simply begging to be played. And yet at the moment when I start to play, the cello ceases to be an object that I might scrutinise. Something else is going on. And to figure out what it is, I want to return to the analogy I introduced at the outset of flying a kite. It's another thing I'd have to do, but I'm no good at it. For the kite to be packed away in a bag or even assembled ready for flight, the kite is just an object. But you take the kite out of doors and launch it into the air, and it is suddenly transformed. Soaring and swooping, it's as if it had come to life, as if by some magical means it had acquired a power of agency. Now perhaps we should describe what goes on between flyer and kite. Here, following the example of the philosopher and sociologist of science Andrew Pickering, perhaps we should describe what goes on as a dance of agency. This is Pickering's term. And by dance of agency, he means a kind of back and forth engagement between a human and a non-human entity, in which each alternately takes the upper hand. So, let's draw it again. Here we have a person running. Here we have a kite flying. And here's his hand. And in between, there's a connected thread. So he's running along. This kite flying again. And there's a thread connecting the two. So, that would say that at one moment, the flyer makes the running while the kite is dragged behind. And the next is the kite that pulls at the hand of the flyer as if dance of agency and interaction, albeit at close quarters rather than mediated by a thread, because I have a cello here between my knees, is there an interaction between myself and the instrument? And if there is, then we are faced with the same question that arises with the kite. Whence comes the power of agency that instantly brings the instrument, previously dormant, maybe in its case, to sonorous life? What wakes the cello up? Well, in the case of the kite, the answer is obvious, although this obvious answer presents a major headache for theorists who tend to imagine that there is nothing in the world except for persons and material entities for them to interact with. Because what lifts the kite is, of course, the air. Without air, no kite could fly, nor, for that matter, could people breathe. We would all suffocate. So, how can we recover air into our theorizing? Should we treat it as just another partner in the dance of agency, such that the dance becomes a threesome, fly a kite air, in which each partner acts upon, and is in turn acted upon the other two? So we could start with a model like this. So there's the flyer, there's the person, here's the kite. First model of the dance of agency is, well, there's an interaction going on between those two mediated by the thread. They're alternatively pulled and lifted. Well, that can't work because the kite can't get up, can't get started without the air. So we'll add the air. It's a third part. And the dance of agency is between these three. Take any one away and the performance will fail. But if we've got all those together, fine. So we're dancing with the air as well as with the kite. By analogy, what air is for the kite, we could say sound is for the cello. The one comes to life in the kite, that is, comes to life in the currents of air that we call wind. The cello comes to life in the currents of sound we call music. So we can add to this another set of terms. So we got flyer, kite, air. That's one sort of threesome. But now we can also have sound, player, and cello. So we've got another threesome. That would be the set. If we took that model, maybe that would work. So, am I, at the moment I sit down to play, dancing a threesome with the cello and the sound? And there's one simple reason why this answer cannot be right. For anything to be an agent, it has to be wrapped up in itself. The concepts of agency and embodiment are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. But the air cannot be wrapped up or enclosed, and nor can sound. Both air and sound, as I've shown, are atmospheric phenomena, and as such they are the very epitome of openness, of the merging of the affective with the cosmic, not their separation. Thus, even if we allow that in flying a kite, the flyer dances with the air, and that in playing a cello, the player dances with the sound, this cannot be a dance of agency, it can only be a dance of animacy. And such a dance is not so much a back and forth engagement between entities as a processual coupling, or what I call correspondence, of ongoing movement. So you have to draw it quite differently, not in terms of this kind of diagram with arrows going backwards and forwards between little circles. Instead of drawing it this way, interaction going on, we have to say, here is the player, here is the flyer, here is the air. Both of them are movements, and somehow these movements are being brought into correspondence. And one analogy actually is a musical counterpart, where lines are counterpoint, are continually responding to one another, they're carrying on and weaving around between the animate movements of the flyer, which could be that line on the left, if you like, and the currents of the aerial medium in which he or she is immersed. It's not that you need air to interact with a kite, but you do need a kite to correspond with the air. And a moment's reflection indicates that it's the same when playing the cello. So the correspondence here is between the kinesthetic awareness of the player, that is, the sense the player has of his or her own movements, and the current of musical sound. So we can call one of these lines, this line we can call kinesthesia. This line we can call sound. So this is the line of the player's awareness of his or her own movement. This is the line of sound. And somehow the movement and the sound are brought into some kind of correspondence. So it's not that, so you don't need sound to interact with a cello, but you do need a cello or some kind of instrument, possibly including your own voice, to correspond with sound. Now, one critical conclusion follows. In itself, the cello has no power. It brings no power to the dance. To think of the cello, as many contemporary theorists are inclined to think of other pieces of so-called material culture, to think of the cello as an object that comes endowed with agency is, in my view, completely absurd. But if, as I've argued, to perform music is not to interact with the cello, but to correspond with sound, then what role does the cello play in this? So to return to my earlier question, what exactly does the cello do? Now, my initial answer is to say that the cello is an example of a general class of things that we can call transducers. So, this is the sense I have of my own movement. This is sound, and there's something sort of here, which is I'm going to call transducer. This is something that's kind of sliding along these two lines and coupling them together as it goes. So transducers are things capable of converting the ductus, that is the kinetic quality of the gesture, its flow or movement, converting the ductus of the gesture from one register of bodily kinesthesia to another.